The grand office building of Anderson Industries towered over the busy streets of downtown Chicago, its glass windows reflecting the golden sunrise of spring 1997. Inside his top-floor office, James Anderson straightened his expensive silk tie, a habit he developed over years of making million-dollar decisions. At 42, he had everything money could buy, except someone to share it with. That morning started like any other. The elevator doors opened, and in walked Diana Thompson, his executive assistant of 3 years. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her neat business suit and perfect posture speaking of professionalism that had earned her this position. But there was something more about her that caught everyone's attention, her brilliant mind and kind heart. Their story hadn't started with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It began with late nights reviewing contracts, shared takeout dinners over budget meetings, and genuine laughter over coffee breaks. Diana's intelligence and wit matched James's business savvy perfectly. She could anticipate his needs before he voiced them, turning their working relationship into a smooth dance of efficiency. Despite the obvious chemistry between them, they both knew the complications their feelings could bring. James was conscious of his family's reputation and the board's conservative outlook. Diana understood the whispers that would follow. A successful black woman in corporate America already faced enough challenges. But love rarely follows the rules of logic. Their first kiss happened during a late-night review of quarterly reports, when the city lights twinkled like stars through the office windows. It was tender, unexpected, and changed everything. What followed was a secret romance filled with stolen moments in private corners of the building, discreet dinner meetings in out-of-town restaurants, and heartfelt conversations about dreams and fears. Diana never asked for promises. She knew James struggled with their relationship becoming public. Yet she couldn't help but notice how his eyes lit up when she entered the room, or how his hand would linger when passing documents. For a few precious months, they lived in their own private world where titles, race, and social expectations didn't matter. Then came the morning that shattered their carefully built world. Diana walked into his office earlier than usual, her hands trembling slightly as she closed the door. James looked up from his computer, immediately noticing something was different about her usually composed demeanor. "I'm pregnant," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air like heavy storm clouds. James's face went through a range of emotions: surprise, fear, and finally, something that made Diana's heart sink: calculation. She watched as the man she'd grown to love transformed into the businessman she knew him to be. His response came wrapped in corporate terminology and legal jargon. A severance package, a non-disclosure agreement, a suggestion of handling the situation at a discreet clinic. Each word felt like a knife twisting deeper into Diana's heart. "I can't have this affecting the company," he said, not meeting her eyes. "The board members, the shareholders, you understand, don't you?" But Diana didn't understand. How could she? This wasn't just about business. This was about love, trust, and most importantly, an innocent life growing inside her. She placed her hand protectively over her stomach, already making her choice. The next hour passed in a blur of paperwork and cold formalities. Security was called to escort her out, her personal items packed in a small box. As she walked through the lobby one last time, head held high despite the tears threatening to fall, Diana made a silent promise to her unborn child. They would survive this. They would thrive. James watched from his window as Diana's figure disappeared into the morning crowd. He told himself it was the right decision, the only decision someone in his position could make. But as he sat alone in his huge office, surrounded by the trappings of success, something felt hollow inside him. What he didn't know then was that this decision would come back to him in ways he couldn't imagine. 26 years later, a young man would walk through those same office doors, carrying the weight of this very moment in his DNA and a story that would change everything. The small apartment felt emptier than usual as Diana unpacked her office belongings. A framed business degree, family photos, and a world's best assistant mug, 5 years of her life wrapped up in a single cardboard box. She placed her hand on her stomach, still flat but carrying a secret that had cost her everything she'd worked for. The severance check sat unopened on her kitchen table. It was enough money to make most people jump at the chance to stay quiet, but Diana wasn't most people. Her grandmother had taught her that dignity wasn't for sale at any price. Still, reality had a way of testing principles. Rent was due in 2 weeks, and job hunting while pregnant would be an uphill battle. That night, she called her younger sister Rachel, the only person who knew about her relationship with James. "I don't need his money," Diana said firmly, though her voice trembled. "But this baby deserves a chance." Rachel listened, offering the kind of support that only sisters can provide. By the end of the call, Diana had a temporary place to stay and a shoulder to lean on. The next few months tested Diana's strength in ways she never imagined. She sent out countless resumes, each interview ending with awkward glances at her growing belly. Some employers were direct about their concerns. A single mother wouldn't be reliable enough. Others simply never called back. Diana took notes during each rejection, building a mental handbook of resilience. To make ends meet, she started working at a local library during the day and doing bookkeeping for small businesses in the evenings. The pay was barely enough, but the library job came with health insurance, a blessing she couldn't take for granted. Between shelving books, she'd rest in the quiet corners, reading everything she could find about pregnancy and childcare. Her pregnancy wasn't easy. Morning sickness lasted well into the afternoon, and her feet swelled after long hours of standing. But the library's regular visitors, elderly Mrs. Chen, who brought her homemade soup, and Mr. Patterson, who always carried her heavy books, became an unexpected support system. They didn't know her whole story, but they recognized a fighter when they saw one. One autumn evening, as Diana reviewed account books for a local restaurant, her baby kicked particularly hard. She paused, pressing her hand against the spot. "You're going to be strong," she whispered, "just like your mama." In that moment, she decided to start a journal, documenting everything she wanted her child to know someday, except the identity of the father. That pain was hers to carry alone. The birth came during a snowstorm in January. Rachel held her hand through 18 hours of labor, while Diana refused to cry out in pain. When the nurse finally placed her son in her arms, she saw a perfect blend of herself and James. The baby had her nose and James's determined chin. She named him David after her late father, a man who had taught her about true strength and dignity. Life as a single mother meant learning to function on 2 hours of sleep, mastering the art of typing financial reports with one hand while cradling a baby with the other. Diana transformed her tiny living room into a workspace with a playpen next to her desk. She learned to recognize different baby cries during client calls and became an expert at muting her phone at just the right moments. The library continued to be her sanctuary. She'd bring David to story time, watching his eyes light up at colorful pictures. The same regulars who had supported her through pregnancy now doted on her son, creating a makeshift family of sorts. Mrs. Chen taught her how to use herbs for baby colic, while Mr. Patterson's wife knitted tiny sweaters that kept David warm through Chicago winters. Some nights, when David was finally asleep, Diana would look at the business cards she'd kept from her corporate days. The life she'd had at Anderson Industries felt like a distant dream. She thought about James sometimes, during quiet moments when David made a certain expression that mirrored his father's. But she never regretted her choice. Her son was growing into something more precious than any corporate success. As months turned into years, Diana built a small but steady bookkeeping business. She worked harder than she ever had at Anderson Industries, but this time, every achievement was truly her own. Her clients appreciated her attention to detail and integrity, qualities that hadn't changed despite everything life had thrown at her. The severance check remained unopened, tucked away in a folder marked "Never Forget." Not because she held on to bitterness, but because it reminded her of her own worth. One day, she promised herself, her son would understand that his story began not with rejection, but with a mother's unwavering love and determination. Little did Diana know that her careful documentation of those early years, the journal entries, the photographs, the small victories and struggles, would become crucial pieces of a puzzle that her son would begin assembling many years later. Each decision she made, each hardship she overcame, was unknowingly setting the stage for a reunion that would shake the foundations of Anderson Industries. Time has a way of turning small moments into life-changing revelations. For David Thompson, these moments came piece by piece throughout his childhood, painting a picture he wouldn't fully understand until much later. At age 7, while other kids brought their fathers to school for career day, David proudly introduced his mom, who taught his class about running a business from home. His classmates were amazed by how she could calculate complex numbers in her head, a skill David had inherited. That evening, helping his mother organize receipts for her clients, he first noticed the old business card hidden in her desk drawer. Anderson Industries, it read in gleaming gold letters. The library remained their second home through the years. David grew up surrounded by books and the warmth of their extended family of regulars. Mrs. Chen, now with silver hair, still brought them soup during exam weeks. Mr. Patterson had passed away, but his wife continued knitting David's sweaters even as he outgrew them faster each year. By 12, David was already showing signs of exceptional intelligence. His teachers recommended advanced placement classes, but these came with fees his mother couldn't afford. Diana worked extra hours, taking on more clients, never letting David see her exhaustion. One night, he found her asleep at her desk, surrounded by calculator tape and invoices. That's when he made a silent promise to make all her sacrifices worth it. High school brought new challenges and questions. David excelled in his classes, particularly in mathematics and business studies. His economics teacher, noticing his talent, encouraged him to apply for academic competitions. During one of these events, David caught his reflection in a window and saw something that made him pause. He looked nothing like his mother's side of the family. His features, especially his determined chin and the way his eyebrows furrowed in concentration, came from somewhere else. The questions about his father had always lingered in the background. Diana had told him the basics, that he was born from love, but circumstances were complicated. She never spoke badly about his father, but her silence on the subject spoke volumes. David learned to stop asking, but he never stopped wondering. One rainy afternoon, while helping his mother digitize old client files, David discovered a newspaper clipping from 1997. It featured James Anderson, CEO of Anderson Industries, at a charity gala. The date on the article was just months before David's birth. Something about the man's face, his stance, the way he held himself, it all felt eerily familiar. David's research skills, honed through years of academic excellence, kicked in. Late at night, after his mother went to bed, he would dig through online archives, piecing together the timeline. Anderson Industries, his mother's former workplace, the dates, the old business card, everything started forming a pattern. His academic achievements continued to stack up. National Merit Scholar, perfect SAT scores, early acceptance letters from top universities. Diana celebrated each success with tears of joy, working even harder to ensure he could accept the best offer. What she didn't know was that David had already begun forming a plan. The full scholarship to Harvard Business School felt like destiny. Diana hugged him tightly at the airport, both of them crying happy tears. "Your future is yours to shape," she told him, her voice full of pride. If only she knew how right she was. At Harvard, David threw himself into his studies with unprecedented focus. He wasn't just learning business theory, he was studying the empire that James Anderson had built. Every case study, every financial analysis, every leadership lesson became a tool in his growing arsenal. His professors noted his particular interest in corporate law and ethical business practices. Between classes, David built a network of connections, carefully avoiding any direct links to Anderson Industries. He started a small consulting firm in his junior year, applying everything he'd learned from watching his mother build her business from scratch. His firm specialized in ethical corporate practices and minority business development, causes that would have made Diana proud. The truth about his father crystallized during his final year at Harvard. A late-night deep dive into old corporate records revealed what must have happened to his mother. The dates of her employment end, the suspicious timing, the generous severance package that she never touched. It all told a story of power, prejudice, and profound betrayal. But David wasn't interested in revenge. His mother had taught him something more valuable than bitterness. She'd shown him how to turn pain into purpose. As he stood on the graduation stage, accepting his MBA with highest honors, he thought about the moment that was coming. Soon, he would walk into the same building where his mother's dreams had been shattered, carrying with him a proposal that would force James Anderson to face the consequences of his choices. What James Anderson didn't know was that the young, brilliant consultant scheduled to meet him wasn't just another business prodigy. He was the living proof that character and determination could overcome any obstacle, a lesson Diana Thompson had taught her son through years of quiet sacrifice and unwavering love. The downtown Chicago skyline had changed over the past 26 years, but Anderson Industries headquarters still cast the same imposing shadow. David stood across the street, watching employees stream in and out of the building. Somewhere on the top floor, James Anderson was probably sitting in the same office where he dismissed Diana Thompson all those years ago. David's investigation had started small. A casual conversation here, a public records request there. His consulting firm, Thompson Solutions, had given him the perfect cover to dig deeper into Anderson Industries' history. Former employees were surprisingly willing to talk, especially those who'd worked there in the late 1990s. Diana? Oh, she was the best executive assistant Anderson ever had, a retired HR manager had told him over coffee. Her departure was sudden, strange really, nobody knew why. The woman had leaned forward, lowering her voice. But there were rumors, you know, about her and Mr. Anderson. David had kept his face neutral, thanking her for the information while his heart pounded. Each conversation added another piece to the puzzle. The building's old security guard remembered Diana, always first in, last out. Then one day, security was called to escort her out. Never sat right with me. His Harvard connections proved invaluable. A classmate's father worked for a law firm that had handled Anderson Industries paperwork in the 90s. Over a networking dinner, David learned about a particular type of non-disclosure agreement the company used for sensitive departures. The template matched perfectly with the unsigned document he'd found in his mother's old files. Late at night in his apartment, David created a detailed timeline on his computer. Photos of James Anderson through the years covered one wall: charity galas, business awards, newspaper clippings. In each image, David could see pieces of himself, the way they both stood with their hands clasped behind their backs, the identical frown when deep in thought. He hired a private investigator, but carefully. The woman he chose specialized in corporate ethics investigations, making it seem like routine due diligence for his consulting work. She came back with more than he expected: old security footage, building access logs, even copies of Diana's performance reviews, all showing a pattern that supported what David had already pieced together. "You've got enough here to make things very uncomfortable for Anderson," the investigator had said, studying David's face carefully. "But something tells me that's not what you're after." She was right. David wasn't interested in scandal or revenge. His mother had taught him better than that. Every Sunday dinner, while he helped her prepare their weekly feast, Diana would tell him, "Success isn't about pulling others down, it's about lifting yourself up." The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen's grandson worked in digital archives and helped David access old company newsletters. There it was, a photo from the 1997 company Christmas party. In the background, barely noticeable, James Anderson and Diana Thompson stood close together, sharing a private smile that spoke volumes. David studied the photo for hours. His mother looked so young, so full of hope. James Anderson looked different, softer somehow, without the hard edge he wore in later photos. What had changed him? What made him choose his reputation over love and responsibility? The most challenging part was keeping his investigation hidden from his mother. Their weekly video calls became exercises in restraint. Diana would share stories about her growing business, pride evident in her voice as she described expanding to new clients. David would tell her about his consulting work, carefully omitting any mention of Anderson Industries. "You seem distracted lately," she said during one call, her eyes showing motherly concern. "Is everything okay?" "Just busy with a big project," he'd replied, feeling the weight of his secret, something that could make a real difference. As his plan came together, David thought carefully about his approach. He could have gone public with the evidence, could have sought revenge through scandal and public shame. But that would have hurt his mother too, dragging her painful past into the spotlight. Instead, he crafted a business proposal. Thompson Solutions had developed a revolutionary corporate responsibility program focusing on supporting single parents in the workplace. The numbers were solid. Companies implementing similar programs showed increased productivity, better retention rates, and improved public image. David scheduled the meeting through proper channels, using his firm's growing reputation to get past Anderson Industries' gatekeepers. His Harvard credentials and innovative business model made him an attractive prospect for collaboration. No one questioned why this particular young consultant was so interested in working with Anderson Industries. The night before the meeting, David stood in front of his mirror, adjusting his tie just like he'd seen James Anderson do in countless photos. The resemblance was striking now. Same height, same stance, same determined look. But behind that similarity was something entirely different: the strength, dignity, and integrity that Diana Thompson had instilled in her son. He picked up his mother's old business card from Anderson Industries, running his fingers over the faded gold lettering. Tomorrow, he would walk through those same doors she'd exited 26 years ago. But this time, things would be different. This time, a Thompson would enter that office not seeking employment or approval, but carrying the power to change everything. What James Anderson didn't know was that his past was about to walk right through his door, wearing his face but carrying Diana Thompson's heart. The meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. would be more than a business proposal. It would be a moment of truth 26 years in the making. The morning sun streamed through the vast windows of Anderson Industries' lobby, just as it had done 26 years ago. David's footsteps echoed across the marble floor, his briefcase containing more than just business proposals. His heart raced, but his face remained calm. Another trait he shared with the man he was about to meet. "Mr. Thompson, welcome to Anderson Industries." The receptionist's smile was professional and practiced. "Mr. Anderson will see you shortly. Would you like some coffee while you wait?" David declined politely, choosing instead to study the lobby's wall of achievements. James Anderson's face appeared in many photos: ribbon cuttings, charity events, business awards. The most recent picture showed him with gray temples, but the same commanding presence. 26 years of success, built partly on the silence of a woman who'd loved him. "Mr. Anderson will see you now," the assistant announced, leading David toward the executive elevator. The ride to the top floor felt like crossing a bridge between past and present. Diana had made this same journey countless times, never knowing her son would one day follow in her footsteps. The office had changed little from the old company photos David had studied. Floor-to-ceiling windows still offered a stunning view of Chicago's skyline. James Anderson stood behind his desk, checking his phone, unaware that his world was about to shift. "Mr. Thompson, welcome." James extended his hand, his grip firm and confident. "I've heard impressive things about your consulting work." David shook his hand, noting how their heights matched perfectly. "Thank you for meeting with me, Mr. Anderson. I believe what I'm about to present will be particularly relevant to your interests." They sat down, and David began his presentation. He spoke about corporate responsibility, workplace ethics, and supporting single parents in the workforce. With each slide, he watched James' reactions carefully, building toward the moment of truth. "Our research shows that companies often lose valuable talent due to personal circumstances," David continued, his voice steady, "especially when those circumstances involve unexpected pregnancies." James shifted slightly in his chair, a subtle movement that didn't escape David's notice. In fact, David reached into his briefcase. "I have a specific case study that might interest you." He pulled out an old photograph, the 1997 company Christmas party shot. "Do you recognize anyone in this picture, Mr. Anderson?" The color drained from James's face as he stared at the photo. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for it. "Where did you get this?" "The same place I got these." David laid out more documents: Diana's old performance reviews, the unsigned NDA, the severance check she never cashed. "Or perhaps you'd be more interested in this." He placed his own Harvard Business School diploma on the desk, his full name clearly visible: David Thompson. James Anderson, a man who had faced down corporate raiders and economic crises without flinching, sank back in his chair. His eyes moved from the documents to David's face, really seeing him for the first time. The resemblance he dismissed earlier now struck him with full force. "Yo." James couldn't finish the sentence. "Diana Thompson's son," David completed for him. "And yours." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crack the windows. James stood up abruptly, walking to the window where he'd watched Diana leave 26 years ago. "How is she?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Successful. Strong. Happy, David replied. No thanks to you. James turned back, aged years in minutes. I made a mistake, he said. Many mistakes. Yes, you did, David agreed. But I'm not here for apologies or revenge. I'm here to offer you something more valuable, a chance to make things right. David pulled out another document, his real proposal. Thompson Solutions has designed a foundation. It will support single parents, provide education grants, and help companies create more inclusive workplaces. It needs significant funding and a major corporate partner. James looked at the proposal, then back at David. You could have exposed everything, ruined my reputation. Why this? Because my mother taught me that true success isn't built on other people's pain, David said. She had every reason to be bitter, to hate you. Instead, she chose to teach me about dignity, responsibility, and turning hardship into hope. Rising from his chair, David gathered the old documents. You have until the end of the week to decide, Mr. Anderson. You can partner with me to create real change, or I can find another way to honor my mother's strength. Either way, her story, our story, won't be buried anymore. As David walked toward the door, James called out, Wait, his voice cracked with emotion. I'd like to tell you about the day I met your mother. David paused, hand on the doorknob. 26 years of questions hung in the balance. He turned back, seeing not the powerful CEO, but a man finally facing the consequences of his choices. The truth was about to come out, not in angry accusations or bitter regrets, but in a conversation that would change both their lives forever. As David sat back down, he thought of his mother, imagining the pride in her eyes when she learned that her son had chosen healing over hatred. 3 months after that life-changing meeting, Diana Thompson stood in front of Anderson Industries once again. This time, she wasn't here as an employee, but as the guest of honor. The lobby had been transformed for a special announcement, with news cameras and reporters gathered to witness something unprecedented. James Anderson stood at the podium, looking older and somehow humbler than his recent photos suggested. Beside him, David waited calmly, his presence a living bridge between past and present. The room fell silent as James began to speak. 26 years ago, I made a decision based on fear and pride, he began, his voice carrying across the hushed room. I chose my reputation over love, my company over responsibility. Today, I'm here to acknowledge that mistake and hopefully begin to make amends. Diana felt tears forming but held them back. She'd cried enough years ago. Today was about something bigger than old wounds. I'm proud to announce the creation of the Thompson Anderson Foundation, James continued, with an initial endowment of $50 million. This foundation will support single parents, provide educational opportunities for their children, and help companies create more inclusive workplaces. The reporter's cameras flashed as David stepped forward. This foundation isn't just about corporate responsibility, he added. It's about recognizing that every person deserves a chance to succeed, regardless of their circumstances. My mother taught me that through her own example. In the audience, Mrs. Chen wiped away tears, while Mr. Patterson's widow squeezed Diana's hand. They'd been there through the hardest times. It felt right that they should witness this moment too. After the ceremony, the three of them, Diana, David, and James, met privately in the same office where their story had begun. The air was thick with unspoken words and years of buried emotions. I kept every letter you wrote, James said quietly, pulling out a worn folder, even though I never had the courage to send them. Diana touched the yellowed papers gently. We can't change the past, she said, her voice steady. But maybe we can help change the future for others. The foundation's first year exceeded everyone's expectations. Over 500 single parents received educational grants. Dozens of companies adopted new family-friendly policies. Diana's experience in building her own business proved invaluable in designing programs to help others do the same. David threw himself into running the foundation, using everything he'd learned from both his parents, James's business acumen and Diana's compassionate approach. The media loved the story. The son who brought healing instead of revenge, the father seeking redemption, the mother whose strength had made it all possible. One evening, as Diana was closing up her home office, she found the old severance check she'd never cashed. With a small smile, she shredded it. That chapter was finally closed. The foundation's first graduation ceremony was held in the Anderson Industries Auditorium. 50 single parents and their children received diplomas from various educational programs. Diana stood at the podium, looking out at faces filled with hope. "Success isn't just about making money," she told them. "It's about lifting others as you climb. 26 years ago, I thought my dreams were shattered. Instead, they just took a different shape." James sat in the audience, watching the woman he'd once feared would ruin him now helping him salvage his legacy. Every time he looked at David, he saw the years he'd missed, but also the chance to do better now. The foundation's office wall displayed 3 framed items: Diana's original Anderson Industries business card, David's Harvard diploma, and a new family photograph. 3 people learning that it's never too late to right a wrong, never too late to choose love over fear. As the sun set over Chicago that evening, Diana stood between her son and his father, watching the city lights come alive. She thought about that young woman who'd walked out of this building 26 years ago, terrified but determined. If only she could tell her younger self that her baby would grow up to heal not just their family, but countless others. "Mom," David said softly, "we're ready to launch the mentorship program whenever you are." Diana smiled, squeezing his hand. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still full of possibilities. And now, that future would be brighter for many other families facing their own challenges. James watched them together, finally understanding that his greatest legacy wouldn't be his business empire, but this chance to help write a different ending to stories like theirs. Sometimes the biggest mistakes can lead to the most meaningful redemptions. The evening ended with Diana leading a workshop for single parents starting their own businesses. As she shared her story, she noticed James and David in the back of the room, both wearing identical proud smiles. Life had come full circle, but this time the circle was wide enough to include everyone who needed a second chance.